the first article I wrote was stimulated by a teaching session with some medical students. We had just seen a young man who had had a fight with his landlord, and some time later had suffered a subarachnoid hemorrhage, a bleed from one of the blood vessels in the brain, trickling blood into the cerebrospinal fluid. And we'd done a spinal tap, a lumbar puncture, and the fluid we got out was not, as people generally describe it, gin clear, crystal clear fluid, but yellow in colour. Now, yellowing of the cerebrospinal fluid rather than the gin clear appearance is evidence that the bleed, the subarachnoid hemorrhage, took place some time before, because it takes time for the erythrocytes in the blood to break up, for the hemoglobin to break down and colour the fluid yellow. So the lesson from this was that probably subarachnoid hemorrhage was not related to the fracas that he'd had with his landlord, which was a separate event, because it had happened sometime later. Now, the technical term for this yellowing is the Greek word xanthochromia, which literally means yellow colour. And so I asked the students if they knew the meaning of the word xanthochromia, and we discussed the Greek word xanthos, which is a sort of bay colour rather than yellow. And we discussed other medical words with xanthos in them, such as xanthelasma. And xanthelasmata are little growths, usually around the eyelids, which look a little yellow. They're deposits of lipid under the skin. Xanthomata are similar yellow deposits, but usually overlying the tendons over the backs of the hands or the elbows or the knees or the ankles. And we discussed xanthines, which are compounds that turn yellow when they're reacted with nitric acid. And caffeine is a xanthine, so we discussed the pharmacology of coffee. And we discussed the pharmacology of theophylline, which is used to treat asthma and is a xanthine. And the tutorial was going very well. We were covering a range of topics, all arising out of this single Greek word. And I asked the students, now can you think of any other medical terms involving xanthine, xanthos? And one young girl said, yes, she said, chrysanthemum. Of course, chrysanthemum is from chryseis, which means gold, and anthos, a flower, nothing to do with xanthine. So I stopped the tutorial at that point and went back to talking about subarachnoid hemorrhage. But it struck me that this was an amusing episode that others might like to hear about. And so I wrote it up as a filler for the BMJ. It was my first piece on words. Interestingly, somebody wrote after the publication of that piece, it was called Curious Yellow, after a movie that was current at that time, and said, you see, these Oxford students, they get it wrong, they don't have a classical education. And I was able to reply, well, actually, she did her preclinical at Cambridge.